In this module, we will be discussing how to describe jobs, specifically describing jobs in a systematic way that we call job analysis. In this lecture, we will go over what job analyses are and why we do them. The next lecture will discuss how we do job analyses, including the sources of information, methods of collection, and the biases and problems encountered with the various methods and sources. The last lecture will include a discussion of how we can use the results of the job analysis process. In our employment process, we need to start with the job and understand that before we can move on to know how to choose the right person and to do things like create a performance evaluation. Imagine you get a performance evaluation and it doesn't consider everything you do, especially if one of the best things you do is not included. How would you feel? Or imagine that something you don't do and have never been told you needed to do is included in your performance evaluation. It incorrectly evaluates something someone does not do as part of their job. It's going to be extremely frustrating. We'll talk more about this when we talk about performance evaluation as well. So, if I were to ask you to give me a description of your current job, what would you say? Take a moment to write down a summary of your job. Imagine you will be leaving your job, and this description is for a job posting to fill your position. If your only job right now is being a student, that's okay. Use that as your job to describe. Pause the presentation and resume when you've finished. So what did you say about your job? Did you write down the major tasks you do? What about the minor tasks? Did you mention the environment that you work in? Is it solitary or full of people? Is it indoors or outdoors? Is it hot or cold? Is it virtual or in person? Did you talk about whether you interact with data? Or if you interact with people or things? Did you talk about knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to do the job? There's a lot more detail to a job than the simple overview we tend to think about. In fact, I would argue that many students get disillusioned by the job they study for, because not all aspects of the job are discussed or understood when they're in school, just learning about the content or knowledge needed for it, rather than experiencing and knowing about the environment and the full list of job tasks. So this is just an image of the discrepancy between a student image and the actual job. If you are in a classroom, you only get a portion of the picture. The extent that you see and understand what the actual job is how much these two circles overlap. You see more about a professor's job because you are in the environment, especially if you work in a research lab. However, there are many jobs not represented well in the academic environment. As you may imagine, there are benefits of the apprentice model of job training, since you get full exposure to the job as you train for it. Let's look at an example job description. This is an actual job ad for the position of Institutional Research Analyst 1 from another university. It starts with a position description. The first thing mentioned is what the office does. Then you see an overview of the job tasks, known as the job description. which includes organizing and analyzing data for surveys and studies, providing research support in the preparation of comprehensive studies and ad hoc reports, providing in-depth analytical and statistical summaries in support of policy development and decision-making, preparing and maintaining project documentation. The second part of this ad includes other things from a job analysis, including requirements, or what we call job specification. In this case, it includes things like proficiency with PC and Microsoft Office applications, software. In this case, it includes things like proficiency with PC and Microsoft Office applications software, including spreadsheets and databases, and effective communication, both verbal and written, and human relations skills. So how do we get this information for this ad? And how do we know it's accurate? We do this through a process called job analysis, which is the systematic study of tasks, duties, and responsibilities of a job and the worker requirements, the knowledge, skills, and abilities, what we often refer to as KSAs, needed to do the job. This can be observable behaviors performed by workers, including what is accomplished and the technologies used to accomplish the end results. It also can include the characteristics of the job environment, such as the physical, mechanical, social, informational elements. Job analysis is the first step in much of what IO psychologists do. So the outcomes of a job analysis include a job description and a job specification, and sometimes, but not always, includes what's called a job evaluation. A job evaluation is an assessment that determines the relative worth of a job for an organization for the purposes of setting fair and equitable compensation rates. This is an evaluation of a job, not of employees. This process helps in understanding the value of each job and is important for determining the salary, benefits, and other compensation. Using subjective opinions of the value of a position in an organization is not an adequate way to accomplish this. Just because someone feels like a position is important doesn't necessarily make it important. If it is your company, you want to pay your employees enough that you are able to recruit and retain them, but not so much that your labor costs are higher than they need to be. Labor costs are the single biggest expense for many companies. A company may want to do a job evaluation in order to establish comparable worth. Comparable worth is equal pay for work of equal worth. Those doing work of equal worth should get paid equivalently. Legally, this was established by the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is also applicable here if there is discrimination shown in differences in wages. We use job evaluation to determine whether jobs are of equal value. It's very hard to define, however, what is comparable. We often hear about this in terms of women being paid less than men. Based on data from 2010, women earn about 77 cents for every dollar earned by men. This has been changing and becoming more equal, but it's a slow-going process. And there are several reasons why the discrepancy exists. An employer has to pay the same if two employees perform work that is equal in the content of An employer has to pay the same if two employees perform work that is equal in the content of the job, the skills, responsibilities, effort, and working conditions. This usually comes down to whether the jobs have the same or similar job titles. So these are the outcomes of a job analysis. But what do the results look like? For this, we can look to my favorite publicly available job database, the ONET. The ONET are the results of job analyses for all the jobs included in the database. The ONET results are based on a particular type of job analysis known as functional job analysis. One of the key features of this functional job analysis is the assessment of interaction with data, people, and things. So let's go to the ONET site and take a look. The job description I showed you earlier for the institutional research analyst was a relatively short list of activities or job tasks of the job. A more detailed list is provided on the ONET. The ONET does not contain the exact title of institutional research analyst. However, the social science research assistant is probably the closest thing. So we can take a look at that to find out information that would be similar to what the institutional research analyst would do. Now, I'd like to point out here that generalizing from one job title or position to another is something that needs to be done carefully. Whether it's generalizing from one position in a company to another similar position in the same company, or even from the same job position at one time to the same job position at a time in the future. There may be differences. People may take on new tasks or drop some tasks. And the results in the ONET are general. In fact, both the DOT, the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, and the ONET in their description have a note cautioning not to use the information for a specific job in a specific place. The results are what is consistent from company to company and region to region. It is the essence of the job, but is not specific to any particular position anywhere, which will have unique features. So for now, let's look at the ONET details of the Social Science Research Assistant. We can see that the expanding list of job tasks includes 23 statements. If we look at the details of it, you can see that there is an importance rating on the left. Now this is if you click on the Details tab at the top of the results. You can also expand because when the results come up, the ONET just shows you a shortened version of the tasks. You can expand that list to see all 23 statements. If we look at the details of it, you can see the importance rating. The listed tasks are sorted from most to least important for that job. So in these results, the top rated item in terms of importance is prepare, manipulate, and manage in extensive databases. Secondly, and similarly rated, is provide assistance with the preparation of project-related reports, manuscripts, and presentations. So we can see all of these top items are very important to this job. Anything that was measured but is not important is not going to show up on the list. There are many more factors included in the report, including technology skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities, our KSAs, work activities, work context, education needed, interests, work styles, and work values. Take some time to go to the O-Net website and look through this. In fact, think about your dream job and look it up on the O-Net, or the closest thing you can find. Look through the results. Make sure to click on the Details tab at the top of the results. And I have posted a discussion for the class. This is not a required discussion. It is a discussion I would like you to do in order to interact with the material here a little more. So with the discussion, look at the O-Net results for your dream job and share on the discussion board what the job is that you looked up and tell us whether it is just as you had imagined or if there's anything that surprises you. Looking at the results of the O-Net or of any job analysis is still not going to be the same as being in the environment and feeling and seeing the actual job. However, it should give you a better idea than simply studying the content that you do in your classes. So some other questions to think about as you think about your dream job and what the O-Net results say. Are the work activities and tasks what you expected? Is there anything that you didn't expect there? What about the work context? Was the work context what you expected? Do the work values and interests fit how you see yourself? Are the education and credentials what you thought they were? Under wages and employment trends, what is the job outlook for this job? Is it expected to grow in the near future? So let's look at a little history of job analysis. Back in the 1930s, our country was going through the Great Depression. Take a moment and think back to that time. It was a time of Great Depression and severe unemployment. Nothing like what we've seen in the recent past. Unemployment rates rose to over 24% in 1933. Take a few minutes here and watch the video I've linked to here. It's a little over 3 minutes, but it gives you some insight into the state of the nation during this time. I just want to make a disclaimer on politics. I am not trying to promote any particular view, and I do realize there is a debate on what brought the country out of the Depression. But what I want you to do is just think about the situation and the state that people were in at that time, with particular notice of the Hooverville shantytowns and the emaciated physical condition of people in the real footage. At this time, there was extreme pressure on the federal government to do something. This was the same year that Congress passed the Wagner-Peiser Act, which formed the U.S. Employment Services. And with these efforts, a committee was formed to come up with a detailed list of occupations and what is required of workers in those positions. The intention was to then assess potential worker skills and place workers into the appropriate jobs. This was done during this time and continues today. In 1939, a release of the first Dictionary of Occupational Titles occurred. This dictionary contained 17,452 job descriptions. It was a huge volume. Since the initial release of the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, or DOT, various editions have come out. 1949 was the second edition, 1965 the third, 1977 was the fourth. And there were supplements in between each that added more job descriptions than were in the previous version. 1991 was the last of the printed copies. This was a revised 4th edition. With the advent of the internet and with the constantly changing nature of work, you can imagine that there always needed to be updates to this DOT. It was just in 1991 that a category for computer-related occupations was added. It's strange to think about today, since so many people and so many jobs are computer-related. 2001 was the start of a mass data collection to change the DOT into an electronic form, which is now known as the O-Net. The O-Net only has slightly less than 1,000 jobs. Now remember, the first DOT had over 17,000 jobs. There are currently updates. There are ongoing updates to the O-Net database. Jobs are continually being reassessed, and any new changes are added to that database. So the intention was to use the information to match workers to jobs available. As I said, the Depression had set in, and there was a need to get a quarter of the working population that was out of work back to work. But in 1939, when the first Dictionary of Occupational Titles came out, there was already an extension of the intended use. It was and continues to be used for the original purpose. However, there were almost immediately other uses found for this massive listing of jobs. Researchers looked at it with an interest in job trends. Those who did vocational training used it, as did everyday citizens who were interested in the possibilities of work they might be able to do. So in the preface to the last Dictionary of Occupational Titles in 1991, there's some interesting points that were made. The Assistant Secretary for Employment and Training, Robert T. Jones, pointed out a few things. Jobs changed drastically in the 14 years between the printings. As I said, computer-related jobs weren't brought into their own category until late. Educational requirements had increased across the board. There was a skills gap between the KSAs people had and what jobs were requiring. So young people were entering the workforce unprepared for the jobs that were available. And I want to point out that this problem has not decreased. This is an issue that is continually being addressed and considered by colleges and universities, the Department of Labor, and employers on how we bring together the education and training that people are getting from schools and what is needed for the current workforce. So if you're interested, the 1991 revised 4th edition of the DOT, the paper version that had so many more job titles, is available online at this website. So I want to point out, job analysis can be extremely boring because we go into such excruciating detail of job tasks and other aspects of the job. However, there are some psychologically interesting aspects of accumulating this information, and it is extremely, extremely important. Imagine a court case in which a man is fired for having a terminal illness, though he is still able to do the required work. In 1993, a jury found that a security firm illegally fired its executive director He had continued to perform his essential job functions, but he had terminal brain cancer. In another case, in 1997, a jury found Walmart guilty of not hiring a man in a wheelchair because of his disability. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who was backing him, provided videotape evidence that he could do a lot of physically challenging activities in his daily life. In both these cases, the companies were found guilty. In order to argue the ability to do a job, courts require a quality job analysis to show what the job is, what is required in the job. The job analysis shows critical duties of the job. This is just one example of why quality job analysis is so important. So why do we do a job analysis? I just described one reason, particularly for court cases, to show that there has been discrimination of some sort. But as you can imagine, it is also important for many other personnel decisions. So for performance evaluations, to make sure that all aspects of performance are measured and not things that shouldn't be measured. This sounds a lot like our content or construct validity, discriminant and convergent validity. And for hiring, how can you defend that selection criteria are valid if you can't show what the job entails? For training, how do you know how to train incoming workers if you don't know what they need to do on the job? For job design and redesign, we need to know who is doing what and how tasks can be moved around. Say we're going to downsize and we need to shift tasks from a position we're losing to other people. We need to figure out how we can do that in the best way. And compensation, like I said, to know the relative worth of different jobs in order to determine how much each person or each job should get paid. So to wrap up, job analysis is an essential piece and the basis of many, if not all, personnel decisions.